All right, we are live on UNLV Biomechanics and we are recording. I'm John Mercer, professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I've got Ted Gerard, colleague at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Hey, Ted, how's it going?
Good, good. Yeah, looking forward to this talk.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun talk. So this is a sports science talk that we're going to have, and we're going to be talking about nutrition in a sense, but we're really going to be talking about some cutting edge work on using fat as a fuel. And we've got Peter Defty here from Optimized Fat Metabolism. Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Hey, John. Hey, Ted. Good to be here.
Well, thanks so much for connecting with us and having this conversation with us. We're both really interested in endurance performance and really interested in the nutrition aspect and interested in this idea of using fats because that makes a lot of sense. But there's also a bit of code, I guess, that needs to be cracked. And we're really interested to hear the work that you're doing and the athletes that you're working with and some of the success that you've had with optimized fat metabolism. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you because I want to hear a little bit about your story in creating OFM, what you're about, and then Ted and I will jump in as we go along.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for giving me the floor here. To start, my personal journey started in 2000 after my first marathon, and I trained for it, and I was shooting for a sub 3 hour marathon. I was turning 40 years old, and I did all the training, and I ate my normal diet, which included everything, and I wasn't really focused on any kind of diet at that point. And then my first marathon, the night before, I did the traditional carb loading and had a bowl of pasta and did everything right. And my training had indicated I was easily on track for a sub 3 hour marathon. And that during that marathon, about mile 18, something started to happen. And I was on for a sub 3 hour marathon. Then, it wasn't too bad at that point, but then by about mile 21, 22, the dashboard lights started flashing, and by about mile 25, system shut down. And I finished. I actually got a Boston qualifier on my first marathon, but it was ugly. The tunnel vision, the numbness, and it's like I knew that if I stopped, it wouldn't be good. And I thought, this is crazy. This doesn't make sense. And because I have a biology degree from UC Davis, I started to think about this, and it's like, in the context of evolution, it didn't make sense. So I did 3 more marathons within about 6 months after that. And I just said, you know what? People like the Maasai, they don't get up and go hunting with a bowl of oatmeal and a bowl of pasta. They go up and hunt and, and so I started eating. I changed my diet. It wasn't sort of any kind of diet. I just added a big juicy steak and a loaded baked potato, a little bit of carbs, but not too much. Ran 3 more marathons and had no trouble. And I thought, whoa, there's something here. There's something to this. And it started out with some dietary shifts and nothing with training. And then I started helping, a couple of years later, I started helping out a couple athletes I was friends with. We were doing trail runs and starting to go longer, 50K, 50 mile. And then we heard about Western States, 100 mile, and got into that. So and then in 2006, I put in for the Western States 100 mile endurance run. I'd been pacing and helping out with the race for years, and I got in. And that year, that was the year it got really hot and only half the field finished. And that was the only time like 52% of the field finished in the modern history of the race. It's always up in the 70s, the high 70s and 80% finish rate now. Anyway, about a month out, a friend of mine, Paul Charteris, who's a triathlete, he tossed me a bag of Vespa and said, hey, my friend Mojo, who's a cyclist, swears by this stuff. And because I'd already been exposed to the whole idea of fat as fuel, I was open to it. Because, you look at a pouch of Vespa, it's got 19 calories. It doesn't, it's not your like gel, it's a liquid. And it's really a catalyst to get your body to metabolize fat at a high rate. So he gave me this thing and I tried it and seemed to work pretty good. And, I didn't notice any big rush, but I didn't notice any down and I recovered really quick. So I used it in Western states and I finished under 24 hours. I was only one of like 40 some odd people who finished under 24 hours out of the 110 people that finished that year. Anyway, fast forward in 2008, I took an equity stake in the company and took over the management for North America and helping them with international. And to my surprise, I found out I got a harsh reality. My N of 1 didn't really jive with the conventional wisdom, which was you're supposed to use carbs. And everything I was saying about too many carbs were a problem, and that we needed to better access and utilize our onboard fat stores was just, it was heresy. And so I knew it worked for me, and I had some other athletes that was working well for. So I'm really stubborn. So I kept with it. And I think that's it's part of the whole thing. Like that's what we do endurance for, right? It's part of that innate human survival instinct, and so I'm particularly stubborn on things. And so I kept doing it. And little by little, I started to get a lot of early adopters, which tended to be people with such severe stomach and gut issues that they developed over time as endurance athletes, that they were willing to try something very different. Does that sound familiar? So anyway, we did that, and all of a sudden we started having people win and place well and set records. And then in 2010, I had lunch with Steve Finney because a good friend of mine said, hey, this guy's talking about the same stuff you are. And that started a relationship in 2010 where they started to look at my athletes, because Steve had, as you know, had published in the 80s on cyclists, and that was at the same time the USA dietary guidelines, for carbs and lowering fat was being developed. So as he said, in his area of research on ketogenic diets, it went toxic immediately in 1983, and his collaborators had to find new areas of research, and he kind of buried it and went on into internal medicine and other things, and then started an obesity clinic. But his passion has always been this athletic performance thing. So he and Jeff Bollock were collaborating on books, and then he got in touch with Jeff, and they started to do some studies on my athletes in 2012. And though that data never got published, it was on some people doing Western states in 2012, a cohort of fat adapted runners and a cohort of high carb runners. That data never got published. The winner of the race was one of the athletes I was coaching that year. He set a course record, but that data was so compelling that it led to the FASTER study, which you guys are probably familiar with. And that study came out in 2015. So from our meeting in 2010 to the publication of the first paper out of FASTER, that was 5 years. And Jeff has actually said to people that, what we're doing here with OFM is literally leading the science. And as you guys know, to develop good science, it takes a lot of time, and it kind of confirms what's going on out there in the real world more than anything else. So that's got us to here. But to a point, as I started developing this, yes, the diet and the nutrition, the fueling are very important, but it's morphed into something way more, because fat adaptation is much more subtle, nuanced, and complex than just literally mainlining a bunch of carbohydrates. So to get somebody to burn fat as fuel at the levels of intensity and rates that we're seeing in the FASTER study, and we've got some data, or I don't have some data, but I have a friend who's a scientist, and she works for a private company, and she's taken some data that's seen people go well over 2 grams a minute of fat oxidation at peak fat oxidation. Yeah, 2.22 grams a minute, and we think we can push that even higher.
Those are some unbelievable numbers, by the way. So yeah,
it is.
John, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, FASTER, the peak oxidation was John Rutherford. He was 1.78 grams a minute, and he and I have talked a lot. And he said that on straight keto, that's great, but he also agrees that we can get over 2 grams a minute.
So let me jump in and first recognize that, this is not a fad in terms of using fat as a fuel. You've been around for some time, and others have moved in this direction, even though this pendulum of nutrition advice seems to swing back and forth. But the constant of using fat as a fuel makes a lot of sense. The
Oh,
trick
yeah.
is trying to access it. But maybe just take a step back, because you've mentioned keto. Maybe talk a little about where keto is and how OFM is related to that or not related.
Well, it's like I said, OFM is a holistic conceptual model where we use a ketogenic diet to a point as a tool. And that's the thing. Everybody goes to the diet as the first thing, right? The diet or the training. And we have this sort of binary compartmentalized way of thinking in terms of our conscious human thinking. And of course, with science, we try to look at one thing, create a hypothesis, and control the other variables, but that's not how it works in the real world. So ketosis, I'm a big believer in nutritional ketosis, but, one of the things, Steve and I had this lunch in like 2013 when ketosis was starting to catch on. And one of the things we talked about was how it was going to get morphed into something we didn't want it to get morphed into. And that's kind of what it's gotten into, is where ketosis is literally in terms of how we understand it today, because I'm going to go down a huge another rabbit hole, and this is all, the physiology is there in the papers, but ketosis in terms of how we define it today is serum ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate in the blood. Your liver is spitting it out. It's triggered by lower insulin and glucagon. So your liver will produce beta hydroxybutyrate out of beta oxidation into the bloodstream as an energy source. And interestingly enough, you can at the same time make glucose in the liver, depending on the hormonal signaling and the metabolic needs, through gluconeogenesis without catabolizing protein. The liver will do that. And it's, the liver is just really versatile in this. So that's how we define ketosis. Now I'm going to drop a little bombshell here. Your liver's always making ketones. It's just, and this is the thing that's really been missed in the overall health thing. And even for athletes, if you've got too much glucose, it's like Steve and Jeff say, glucose is the metabolic bully. It has to cut to the front of the line and get burned first, because as any type 1 diabetic will tell you, if they don't titrate themselves with some insulin, if they bolus with glucose, they'll die. Because too much glucose is toxic. So it has to get burned first. So ketosis, that's how we define ketosis, but our liver's always making ketones, and it's depending on that hormonal signaling. Those ketones are going to be used for substrates for other things like cholesterol. And this is where this is what I think is driving a lot of the heart disease, is when we have excess energy, we end up making too much cholesterol, and that cholesterol isn't getting metabolized properly because it's on the other side of things, it's got too much glucose that has to be burned. So the cholesterol accumulates. It's trying to repair the soft tissue damage from the inflammation, and it's off to the races with heart disease. But that's what we call normal. And that's all in the and here's the thing, like when a woman's birth a child and she goes into lactation, that's where she's making ketones like crazy, but they're not going to show up in the blood. They're going to be used as substrates for milk production. So ketones, your liver's always making ketones. It's just what it decides to do with it based on the signaling. And ketosis, the way we define it, is nutritional ketosis, where we get the hormonal signaling down to where we're using ketones as a energy substrate.
That helps a lot. So now I'm gonna ask you about another term that you've used, and obviously it's in your company, is just fat adaptation. Yep. So we use this, we hear it all the time, but what do we mean when we say we're going to convert someone to be fat adapted?
Well, and that's why I don't go with just the keto thing. And I think, like I said, keto is a tool, and it's a very useful tool, but fat adaptation is a whole nother paradigm. And this is the paradigm I've been pushing, because with fat adaptation, this is another little bombshell show. When you're well fat adapted, somebody who's healthy and really well fat adapted, they actually have really good glucose tolerance, carbohydrate tolerance. And that's one of the things I look for, is we try to find that balance where you're not in deep ketosis, because deep ketosis is a conservation state. Okay. When you're doing the high fat, eucaloric type of diet, or even hypocaloric diet where you're trying to lose weight, that's a conservation state. So you down regulate your pyruvate dehydrogenase, or PDH pathway, and then all of a sudden you lose that gear. And that's one of the big limitations with a ketogenic diet, is you lose that top gear. And there's other things you lose too, not just your pyruvate dehydrogenase, but that's the one the science really suggests can lose out. So you want to find that balance with fat adaptation where you're not down regulating any of your energy pathways. And then with fat adaptation, by getting yourself fat adapted, you're not only going to increase your access and utilization of fatty acids for your energy substrate, but in doing so, you're going to increase your mitochondrial density, your cell health. And then also, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is the whole idea of vascularization. And when I've read a lot of publications on like diabetes, heart disease, everybody knows your cardiovascular system gets stiff. All those pipes, whether arteries, veins, capillaries, microcal, they get very stiff and inflamed, right? And that's actually what drives high blood pressure. You take in salt, you're going to get thirsty, you're going to take in fluid. The pipes can't grow, the pressure goes up. Well, when what they're seeing with adaptation is the arterial distensibility, or the vascular distensibility, grows. So all of a sudden that capacity to move fluid, move blood, move oxygen with that blood in the hemoglobin increases. So all of a sudden that ability to metabolize more fat at higher intensity increases. You're moving cholesterol, which are composed of fats, and that increases that nutrition to the cells to build more and larger mitochondria. And then that is where that carbohydrate tolerance comes in, because when you have to burn a few matchsticks of glucose in a race, you've got the mitochondrial density to absorb that oxidative stress, whereas over time, you're literally burning yourself out.
So would you say that it's more of, and in this term is a little bit of a buzz term, metabolic flexibility?
I hate that term. It's not a flexible thing. It's like the body is a matrix that can do it all.
But isn't that what flexibility is?
But it's not, it seems to be, the flexibility thing seems to be, I don't know, they get co-opted. It's not one or the other. And it's like as you burn more fat, you can burn more glucose.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is adapting to do both, right?
Yeah.
So elite athletes need to do both, right? Unless you are going, like the 100-mile at this very steady rate, in a triathlon, there's going to be ebbs and flows, right? And there's going to be times when I need to put out 330 watts for, on a climb for 5 minutes. And I'm not doing that purely off of one substrate. Right?
That's correct.
And that's what I meant by flexibility, is the ability to utilize fat as the primary fuel source. But like you said, when you need to burn those matches, you can access the carbohydrates for that fuel.
Right. But that's why I call it optimized fat metabolism, because when you optimally get your fat metabolism, everything just sort of falls in place. It's finding that balance. And that's why fat adaptation versus keto, because right now the way the quote unquote rules are set with keto, you're going to go into deep keto and stay there. And it's very strict. Now, the flexibility part that's really good, once you understand the concepts of when and how to do it, is as somebody gets more fat adapted, the carbohydrate tolerance grows, the restrictions on what you can eat, that window of tolerance and the variety is huge. Yeah. It just keeps growing and growing. And all the people I've worked with after a couple of years, when they're successful with it, they say, I don't diet. I eat what I want when I want, because you're not hangry where you have to have something. And you tend to make good choices 80-90% of the time. And then when there's a social event or you just want to have something, you can. And usually when you do that, you feel so bad. It's sort of like a good way to remind yourself why you don't do it all the time. But you don't have that sort of that carbohydrate addiction, which, and like I said, with OFM, we want to find that balance where we're not down regulating that access to glucose, right? And ketones, because ketones and aerobically, glucose and ketones are interchangeable. And I think that once you're well fat adapted, the body prefers ketones over glucose for the fast burning aerobic fuel source. Now you always have your beta oxidation going on the background. That's your base load energy substrate, right?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question this is like a general audience question, because not everyone has access to a metabolic cart and the testing levels of like an exercise physiology lab. How can somebody tell if they're fat adapted? Okay, well, first thing they can tell is they're not going to be hangry every 2 or 3 hours. If somebody out there and they're an athlete and they've gone down the conventional, quote unquote, healthy thing that like what Runner's World and Triathlon magazine put out, a lot of them are like they're told to feed all the time. They got their feed bag and they're eating all the time. And if they don't eat for 2 or 3 hours, they start to feel the energy dips or they emotionally get unstable. Once you can get off that's when you're on your way. That's the first thing to start. And then being able to do, workouts without a ton of, low to moderate intensity workouts without having to constantly be looking for something to prevent a bonk. Yeah. Those are good signs. And then your recovery will start to get better. Okay. So those are all things that are really good signs that, energy levels will be more stable, both inside exercise and outside. And the reason I asked is because a lot of people, I think that they're fat adapted, and they truly aren't, right? Right. They can go for a 2 or 3 hour fasted bike ride, but struggle with it. That's right. That's right. They say, well, I'm fat adapted because I can ride for 3 hours without fuel. Well, if you're struggling with it, I guess you probably aren't. Yeah. And you don't have to be on the couch. You shouldn't be on the couch or wasted after that workout. That's another thing. It's like you shouldn't be that hungry after, like, for a moderate workout, you're just not hungry. I mean, I did a 46-mile hike in Kings Canyon. It went up to 12,000 feet. I was out there for 18 hours, and I probably took in maybe 1,000 calories the whole time. And then when I was done, I just wasn't hungry. The last 5 hours I took in Vespa salt and water, and I wasn't hungry. I had stuff on me, but I just had no hunger. It had kicked in. I was going low. It was very low intensity. It was a hike, but. So let me ask you the 1,000-foot question then is, how many calories of energy did you burn that day? Approximate. Probably 8, 10, 12,000. Okay. I was out there. Yeah. You took in like 1,000. Yeah. So this is obviously an easy question for you to answer. So you utilized many calories of your own stored energy. That's correct. And that was a low intensity. That would be for low right. And we found, like, there's a guy this spring who ran 100 miles in 18 hours and change on salt and water. So my question is, just because, and this is once again high level stuff, and I'm not questioning your science at all, because I think it's great. Yeah. Is because should we? If you're properly fat adapted, there's no harm in it. I mean, there's a point, yeah. But actually it is a sign of robust health. This is our evolutionary heritage. Okay. So, but it's not just the ability to go 100 miles on that. Because, and why I'm going down this path is because, in our world of endurance athletes, we run into a lot of people that are suffering from like relative energy dysfunction and disorders, and have problems actually with weight and with body image. And I can just see the lights going off and go, oh man, I can exercise so much more than what I'm bringing in. And then next thing you know, we have endocrine dysfunction and we go down that road. And so what are you seeing with the endocrine system in particular and hormonal levels when we're fat adapted? I know this is an easy question for you, but
it's not, and this is why I lose people, because I don't have an easy answer. And that's the problem, is everything we're getting delivered on the internet is like this easy, you do this, you get results. And as you guys know, in your fields, the human body is complex, and it's a complex multivariable thing. And we use science to try and understand each little piece, but it's in this dynamic, moving matrix of physiology that's going on. So for the audience, bear with us, because we're trying to give you a much more complex, nuanced thing. And it's like I tell people, I know you want an easy answer, but you're an individual, and you're selling yourself short as an individual. Are you simple as that? No.
That's why I said that's the easy answer. That's what I'm getting at is what will cause an endocrine dysfunction in one person.
So here's the thing. I'm seeing, like I said, my early adopters were all people with stomach and gut issues, and some of them were gaining weight, all that, and most of it was due to their stomach and gut literally being fried. But there was endocrine disruption on high carbohydrates, because as we know, a lot of carbohydrates trigger an insulin response, and with all that insulin, you end up, insulin's a very powerful hormone, but it disrupts the hormonal balance on that end. What I'm seeing now, just as much, is we're seeing people doing deep keto, trying to be fat adapted, and they're getting adrenal stress because they're trying to push themselves, and and there's no glucose to do it, and their hormones are trying to push even harder, and they can't do it, and then they fall into adrenal stress, not adrenal fatigue, because full-blown adrenal fatigue is a misused term online.
Yeah, but we also know that when you're under adrenal stress all of the time, then your mineralocorticoids are also getting potentially messed up.
That's right.
And then that leads to potentially even thyroid dysfunction, and and then even into our reproductive hormones as well. When people do that, right? And we've seen that. And I think even the FASTER study, when you look into it, there were some people that really struggled with that because they were pushing themselves too hard during this fat adaptation period, and especially in that study, the strict keto time.
Well, the guys in the FASTER study, they were the low carb diet cohort, they were all well adapted. Actually, I worked with almost every one of the guys who were in the low carb diet thing. But yeah, people struggle because they're trying to adhere to the keto and not taking care of it. And that's the thing. Keto is they're looking at a diet, and like my OFM pyramid, the first tier is the fat adapted metabolic state, right? Getting your body back to that basic level. And that's a level where you don't feel great. You don't feel like you actually can't perform well, but you're not climbing the walls looking for your next sugar fix, right? The second one is the nutrition, not calories. And that's where it's really key to make sure, things like vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, iodine. I practice something called whole animal eating, because evolutionarily we ate the whole animal, and it's really important to have organ meat, have skin and connective tissue. I'm really big on the full spectrum of collagen matrices for a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, most modern athletes are eating way too much muscle meat if they're on an animal thing. And then I've worked with a lot of very high level age group triathletes and runners who are vegetarian, and they're vegetarian. They're very serious about it, but they're willing to make some compromises because they want to be healthy and they want to do well in their sport. So I get them on liver capsules and gelatin capsules, and as soon as that happens, boom, their performance goes through the roof. Their injuries stop. So it doesn't take much, and that's really key with this whole big discussion on plant-based versus animal-based. What I'm seeing, and then you have the carnivore thing now, right? That when people get that proper nutritional balance, and the easiest way is through eating the whole animal.
You're getting with the methionine and not enough of the glycine.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. That's one of the standout things is methionine metabolism gets converted to homocysteine if you don't have the cofactors that are in liver and gelatin.
And then, and we don't go down too much rabbit hole, but for people,
Yeah.
Homocysteine is a marker for cardiovascular.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge marker for cardiovascular, but when you add in the organ meat and the skin and connective tissue, it's not even an issue.
Now, and I'll add that for the audience. If you get regular blood work, every now and then go get a homocysteine test, especially if you're eating a lot of meat and without balancing with glycine. You'll be surprised what you find potentially. And it's not something that's like you'd get on a standard blood test, but it's a really cheap add-on. I think last time I got it, it was like $12 add-on to my test to get a homocysteine.
Yeah, and it's not just the glycine; it's the vitamin K2 that would be in liver and some other things that are in liver that balance out the proper metabolism of methionine.
And I love the fact that you mentioned the liver tablets, because I use those personally. Because I can't stomach liver, and probably worse than that is my wife can't either, and I do the cooking. So I think I could make it to a point where I personally could stomach it, but the supplements are really quite easy.
Yeah, I have a liver supplement, and I'll send you some samples of, but it's okay. Comes out of for people who are concerned, it comes out of the beef cattle in the Channel country of Australia, and it's a very remote cattle station where all the water flows inland, and they add kelp from the Tasmanian Sea, which is like the cleanest sea, and so it's got the free iodine, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I put almost everybody's on capsules or bulk collagen because I can't get people, but I eat liver, I'll eat tripe and broth, bones. I mean, I make it a regular thing. This is kind of gross, but I eat menudo con patas sin grano, which is tripe soup with the joints or the hoof without the hominy. And I eat that on a regular basis because it's just, I'm really big on getting a lot more of the full spectrum of collagen in the system.
Peter,
I don't want to take us too far down that road, so go ahead, John.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in because this is you're covering a lot of great physiology and actual practical advice already.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to jump in on was, should males and females be asking different questions?
Oh, absolutely. But let me finish with the whole animal thing. The point I want to make, though, in terms of the whole debate about sustainability is, if you go and look at what Alan Savory's doing with the Savory Institute and regenerative agriculture and all that, the amount, when you eat the whole animal, the amount of animal products you need to eat is surprisingly small. It, like we were talking about my hike and how many calories I burned versus how many calories I took in. It just gets downright scary how little we need to eat. And it goes back to that, I always look back to evolution for my answers. That's what I find. It's like, what were those evolutionary pressures that shaped us as humans and made us so robust? And, that's where I find those answers. And it all makes sense in the picture of the human physiology, biology, and nutritional needs. And then that bigger picture of the whole cycle
but as a
of
society,
life.
we need to push regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
And we're not doing a good job of that as a society.
Yeah, right. And once again, it goes to a more complex answer because, of course, everybody means well, but the plant-based people think it's plants, not animals, but it's actually more complex than that if you look at the whole biological system, because ruminants, you look at the annals of the people, Lewis and Clark and the other discoverers of the North American continent, or the people in Africa, these huge ruminant herds and the bird flocks were just part of that whole cycle of life. It wasn't just plants growing and grass growing, and then predators eat it. And just to finish up this thing, it's like a chapter in the book I'm writing is what I call the grand bargain. And it's like humans made the grand bargain when we traded a big gut for a big brain. And and then that set us off on the trajectory we were on, where we're talking here, via Zoom and everything else. But, it's like I tell my vegetarian friends, I've got my eyes in the front of my head. I have canine teeth. I only have one stomach. And, this is just sort of facts. And while we can and should eat plants to an extent, depending on what we're doing and who we are, it's very complicated to do a vegan diet. It can be done in theory, but it's very, very difficult to combine everything. And I don't think it's going back to evolution. I don't think, when you've got 2.5 million years of evolution to develop the nutrition we need, which was hunting and gathering, mostly hunting. The anthropological record is clear on that. It just, how can you do that with a bunch of man-made stuff that we're trying to just get this amino acid and this amino acid? Yes, we can tweak it with these things, but the base should be just real food and not a lot.
Great. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So males versus females, what questions should each be asking?
The females men are easy compared to females.
Yeah.
And this is, once again, evolutionary hardwiring and the balance of hormones to a point, like you were saying, Ted, that can be upset so much easily. With men, you're just going to if you get your nutrition bad and you overtrain, you just knock their testosterone down and get their insulin up, and they gain weight. But females, it's very delicate. And unfortunately, the female, and part of this has got to do with the female brain hardwiring too, and that's hormonally driven too. But one of the things that's key for a female, I think, to start with is getting fat adapted is really key, because you have this delicate dance when you eat food of insulin, ghrelin, and leptin, which you guys are probably familiar with. But females produce 2 to 3 times the leptin signaling, because, like I say, from an evolutionary standpoint, females are I'm just talking science. I'm not talking like a chauvinist male here, okay? Because I can be accused of that. Females are designed by nature to eat and save for 2, right? Because, gestation, late gestation, childbirth, lactation, you're not going to be, a female is not going to be very good at hunting and gathering, and you can't, we're made so robust that, we don't have to depend on a tribe to be around, or even the male to be around to take care of us. So they're literally eating and saving for 2. So like with leptin, the leptin signaling, leptin resistance is much bigger problem in females than males, right? Where you don't have that message saying, oh, I'm full, I want to eat. So women, that's why women tend to, their hunger triggers are much more sensitive. They'll put the fat, store the fat easier. It's harder to take off. But if they get themselves well fat adapted, it really does make a difference. And all my athletes tell me, if they're cycling, meaning menstrually, that mid-luteal through onset of menses part of the cycle, that quote unquote special time, it's much less tricky to navigate, both for the female and their partner. Just because of the lower inflammation, because that's where during mid-luteal through the onset of menses, the uterus gets inflamed because it's getting ready to shed the lining. So it's that extra layer of inflammation from too many carbs, creates, somebody not feeling good. And when they don't feel good, they tend to get emotional and easily irritated, etc. So that's one of the big key points I could take to females. I think, for both males and females, fat adaptation, it's going to get you that leaner body composition hormonally. With males, your testosterone, we've had a lot of males with low testosterone, their testosterone's come back. And that's combining it. OFM, we look at training too. So we like to scale the training and synchronize it with people's life loads, because somebody who has a big workload, they can't have the same training load that somebody who's, some young guy who's chasing the dream, right? He can do 2 workouts a day, take a nap in between, get 8 hours of sleep at night. So you have to scale that too, so you're not doing it. So that's what I would say is really important for for athletes of both genders, but females are very complex. And this goes back to the whole thing of stress and cortisol. They're also much more, they're triggers for stress and and cortisol response are much greater. So they're looking for security, and that's a big part of what we do, is really try to address that so that people aren't stressing. Another factor that's really important is, ironically, EMF exposure. We're getting a lot of that, and and there's a gal in Berkeley named Bev Rubik, PhD, and she's done some pilot research on EMF and blood reletting. And if you see her, the slide she gets, just of people using a cell phone versus not, in the carry mode and the active mode, and what it does to roulette your red blood cells in your blood, it's pretty shocking. So I think the chronic load of EMF is another factor, because, when you look at it, like I'm looking at optimizing your fat metabolism, and to burn fat, you got to be relaxed. You can't be stressed, because as you guys both know, what happens when we stress? We ping the cortisol. We want to burn sugar because that's the fight or flight mechanism. And so there's all these different things in our modern man-made world that are pinging that stress response. And it's just peeling back all those layers, not just the diet. Yes, the diet's a foundation thing, but if somebody's vitamin D isn't up, if they're in a stressful job or relationship, or even if they have this thing because their diet, like they're counting their calories and they don't want to go above 50 grams of carbs a day, or something has a teaspoon of sugar in it, or it's organic or pesticide free, if you're having to think about that stuff, all that stress it's not going to help your ability to burn fat.
Mm-hmm. And just for the audience, EMF is electromagnetic field, and we live in this electrical wilderness. So that's interesting that you're looking at that as well. So yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, because your product is Vespa. I don't know how many people know about Vespa and what that's designed to do. Could you talk a bit about?
Yeah. Vespa is it's a completely natural supplement, but it's not even classified as a supplement. It's considered an acidified food by the FDA, and it's composed of honey, propolis, royal jelly, and wasp extract, which is a peptide we literally get from the giant wasps. I think people might have heard of the murder hornets. Yeah. That's where we get the peptide from. The murder hornets. And it's one of these accidental discoveries of nature, where some Japanese entomologists in the 80s and 90s were studying this giant wasp, and they were following it, and they found it could fly 60 to 70 kilometers a day on average, and up to 100 kilometers a day on average. It would go, and it's a predatory wasp, so it would attack other animals, kill them, masticate them, and wrap them in a food ball, and take them back to the colony and feed them to the larva. And in exchange, the larva would feed them this peptide, and this peptide was vital for this wasp to be able to access the fat in its thorax for the performance it needed to go out and fly, beat its wings at a high rate, attack and kill prey, and masticate it and fly back with a third of its weight underneath it to feed. It's like, what can it do? It's like, these are the super performance athletes of the animal world. And bees, ants, wasps, and termites all have this mechanism, and that's why they have the ability to do what they do. But it's through this symbiotic relationship between two life stages called trophaxis. I don't want to lose anybody, but that's how nature works. But what they said was, whoa, this is crazy. But they hypothesized that because animal cells are like 90 some odd % similar across species, that this peptide would have a similar effect on other animal cells. So they tested it in mice and rats in swimming tests to exhaustion. And sure enough, it did that. And then they did some tests on that and published some papers, but they really aren't very good papers. So I don't really want to share them. I can share you the hypothesis and stuff like that. And so Vespa is this product that uses these natural insect ingredients as a catalyst to supercharge your fat burning. And actually you don't have to do a thing. And that's what we recommend to a lot of people who are skeptical about fat metabolism. We tell them, okay, you don't just try the Vespa and see how you go. And that'll give you a taste of what's going on. And like what'll happen is I have to tell people what you're going to notice is what you don't notice. And that sounds like a total sales gimmick, but you don't notice the ups and downs in energy. You don't have a rush, but you don't have a crash either, right? So you don't have the ups and downs in energy. You don't have the mental fog. And then the recovery, that's something you have to experience to believe. It's like you didn't run you didn't run the day before, or didn't have a hard bike. It's just the recovery is off the charts. And when you combine it with OFM, it just gets ridiculous. And that's the thing. And the key to that recovery, the key point to the recovery part is it's another paradigm shift because of all this talk of recovery. It's not that you actually recover faster. It's because you have not done the damage on a cellular level in the first place. And this go ahead.
Could we use this product if we're not fat adapted?
Yeah, you don't have to do a thing. There's a lot of the world-class marathoners who won Olympic gold medals at the marathon used Vespa, and they weren't doing anything particularly fat adapted. They were eating a lot of protein because their coaches had them eat protein, but they weren't like super fat adapted. The guy who won the 2018 Boston Marathon, Kawaguchi, that was his fourth marathon in 4 months, all under 220.
Right.
And that's one of the things I want to lead into is this recovery, this lack of damage instead of the body trying to recover and get back to baseline after training to get that training effect, your body actually spends a lot more time in the supercompensation modality of getting stronger, fitter, hormonally, muscularly, aerobically. So what we've seen with the athletes I've worked with is they just continually get stronger with the proper training load, and it can be pretty substantial.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I'm trying to take notes here. What's the name of the peptide?
They just call it wasp extract. It's the
I thought you gave it a long name of a peptide, but okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Yeah.
Something that seems to have a little resurgence here is this phrase low energy availability. And yet when you're fat adapted and maybe using this product, you don't necessarily, what you're talking about, not necessarily need to take in a lot of calories through exercise. So I'm curious as to, is there a detriment to having too low of a percent body composition where, if you have plenty of fat on you, you've got plenty of energy availability?
Well, let's look at, say, an elite level athlete that's, say, a male that's 6 or 7% body fat. Would that be?
Yeah.
I mean, say 150 pounds, 6 or 7% is 8-9 pounds of body fat. So for most people's events, you've got the body fat on you theoretically. Now that's part of optimized fat metabolism. We use strategic carbs strategically. So we'll bring them in during event, and I tell athletes, on race day, the three things are use what you want, what you like, and what's available. What you know works and what's available. And don't worry about it, because you're just gonna take in less than you were before. Because you see at the triathlons, when people got their bikes racked, they've got 20 gels taped to the crossbar, and it's like this is insanity. Mm-hmm. But yet this is considered normal. And I appreciate y'all being here and buying into this, because you guys get it. This is not going to be a good outcome at some point for that athlete who's trying to pop 20 gels on the bike.
No, for sure. And I'm certainly guilty of trying to take in too many calories, and I'm guilty of taking in too few calories. So
right. And that's where on race day, I do want people, when they're at that race level and they're pushing their aerobic threshold and having surges into anaerobic levels, they need to be able to have access, quick acting fuel sources, whether it's carbs, simple sugars, ketone esters, any of those things on top of that, of your body. I mean, people have been we've been sold and told this idea we need these external calories, and and in that selling and telling and focusing on we've forgotten that our physiology is equipped to supply 80 or 90% of that, instead of trying to supply all of it through external calories and only a fraction of it from our internal calories. We've kind of gone backwards on it. I'm just trying to turn that around, and it's not it's not that I don't encourage people to use a gel or a waffle or liquid nutrition or a ketone ester. No, absolutely on race day, because, as we talked before, deep keto is only going to get you so far. But
Well,
yeah.
no, that's great. And one of the biggest problems a lot of people complain about with endurance performance and iron distance, especially, is the GI problem. So
Yep.
clearly we have not figured it out. So I think trying to look at this from different angles is really, really important.
Well, and the thing is, I was talking with somebody yesterday about this, and they were talking about their development of GI issues. I was last night on a presentation in Mexico. A guy with a cyclist who has celiacs. He didn't start out with that. And the analogy I use, and it fits in the biological model, the metaphor I use is, when you look at how this digestive tract is composed, it's composed of epithelial cells, villi, and they have a mucous membrane. And I want people to think about it like an Amazon rainforest canopy. You've got these trees and plants that are creating this big canopy, that within that is residing the other flora and fauna, which is, the analogy for that would be your biome. And there's a lot of talk on the biome, right? So you want to build this big, healthy rainforest canopy and populate it with a strong, diverse flora. And see, epithelial cells, and this I learned from Steve and Jeff, is they're high turnover and they're very sensitive to oxidative stress. So what happens when we're pumping a lot of carbohydrates and sugars is they're easily oxidized. We're literally burning that rainforest down. And over time, that epithelial and the villi gets smaller, that forest gets shorter. It's like what they're doing in the Amazon, burning it down for cattle. Plants still grow there. There is a fauna, but it's nothing like it was before. And that's exactly what we're doing to our stomach and gut. And when we do a lot of carbohydrates over time, we have to, it's not that we can't do them occasionally, it'll take it, but we can't do it all the time. And that's one of the reasons why I really push the collagen and really push fasting, because the autophagy and everything is really critical. And getting that oxidative stress for the epithelial cells down is just so critical for long-term performance and health. And I don't have an easy answer. This is a big moving piece, everybody's body, and we have to really care for it if we want to get the performance out of it, both in the short and long term. It's just if we're young and we're healthy, boy, if we can slam a bunch of carbs, they're going to work and we're going to win races, right? But what that's going to do to you over time is it's just crazy. I mean, I've worked with Amanda Stevens, and talking with her when she came to me with stomach and gut issues, and she'd had her gallbladder removed, and I got her on bile salts. It's just like she and I, she had that light bulb moment that her career as a triathlete, it was setting her up for this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is great. This is really interesting stuff. And it is a moving target, and lots of different parts that go into figuring out what works for any particular person. Yeah. Peter, I really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with us. This has just been really interesting and helpful. And we've covered a lot of ground in this 50 minutes to an hour. So this has been fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you all having me on here. I know I kind of wander around, but maybe next time, if you want me on, we can go through in a little more structured way and go through things. But it's just it's multifaceted, and it just keeps me my head spinning.
Honestly, these are the kind of conversations that John and I like to have with people, where it's free flowing, and it's it's three intelligent people sitting around talking about things and learning from each other. And this was great. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I'd love to have more of these conversations with you, because I'm always gleaning stuff from the guys who are doing the research.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Peter. And thanks for people for watching this. And again, you've been very generous, and I really appreciate you doing this.
Okay. Thanks very much. I appreciate being on.